next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to be covering a very specific area of immigration law. As Richard mentioned, that's fear-based, including asylum, withholding of removal, and relief under the Convention Against Torture. I'm going to mainly focus on asylum because that's really the best form of relief. It comes with all sorts of benefits, including a green card. You can bring family members, only spouses and kids, whereas withholding and cat relief, you really don't, it's kind of more of a limbo state. The government can deport you at any time when they feel that your home country is better, and it doesn't lead to a green card. Asylum is a very important form of relief for clients who fled their countries due to harm and severe discrimination, especially those from the LGBT community, who might not be able to fit in some of the categories that Richard had mentioned. There's a common misperception with asylum, and a lot of my clients, who are gays, they come and they don't apply. And really, for asylum, you need to apply within 1 year. Otherwise, you're subject to a bar. Now, there are exceptions, and we've definitely been able to win cases where clients haven't applied within 1 year. But I have a lot of clients who come and say, well, in my country, being gay was illegal, and I didn't think here there would be a system of protection, so I didn't bother to apply. Or I thought that only a political activist. I wasn't an activist in my country, I was closeted. So there's that common misperception, and hopefully we can get the word out that you don't have to just be an activist. There are several other categories that can help you get asylum protection. I've also been asked to talk a little bit about detention. As Richard mentioned, there has been a real movement in immigration to increase arrest and detentions, including that of asylum seekers. In Massachusetts, even 5 years ago, asylum seekers were never detained, and today it's a little bit different. Although in January there was a new ICE directive that said if you could prove that you have a credible fear of returning to your country, so you don't have to prove asylum at the onset, but if you could show that you have a credible fear of removal, that they won't detain you, they won't keep you in detention. And actually, Boston's been pretty good. We've got 3 or 4 people out. We were able to get them that credible fear interview, and they've been released. Okay, so before I started, I just wanted to get a background, actually, of the audience. I was wondering how many of you have heard of asylum or political asylum? Okay, excellent. How many of you are students or practitioners and actually have taken on an asylum case? Hopefully that's going to change by the end. And how many of you know of somebody or are afraid for somebody's safety in terms of immigration detention? Maybe you know someone who's undocumented, afraid they might get picked up. Yeah. It's a big deal. There are over 11 million undocumented immigrants in the U.S. right now, many who are unfortunately not eligible for any type of relief. And I think Ben is going to talk a little bit about comprehensive immigration reform, and hopefully those numbers of people who aren't eligible for something will change. There are about 50,000 people annually in the U.S. who apply for asylum. Unfortunately, the grant rate is fairly low. It's about 28% for people who apply affirmatively before the asylum office, and about 46% for those who apply before court. So actually with asylum, it's a two-step process. It can be a two-step process. There's something that's called the affirmative process. So if you manage to get into the U.S. and immigration didn't catch you, you can apply affirmatively. You can tell the government, here I am, whether you've been here for more than a year or not, you make sort of that calculated decision, I want to apply for asylum. The other way you apply is you get caught. Maybe you cross the border with a fake passport, or you came in on a valid visa, it expired, and you were driving and a cop pulled you over. Now, everyone who gets pulled over, basically they do, and if they think you're a foreign national, they'll do a background check, and they're all connected. Before they weren't as connected with immigration, but now they are. So if you get caught, then you're put into removal proceedings, also known as deportation proceedings. And so then you're using asylum as a defense to removal. So the discrepancy is really, the courts are actually quite good at adjudicating asylum. The asylum offices, even though they're very special, they're not sort of, some of the things that Richard had talked about, those forms of relief, are adjudicated by Citizenship and Immigration Services. With asylum, they actually have specially trained officers, trained in human rights, trained in country conditions, who adjudicate asylum cases. It's not sort of ordinary USCIS officers, but still a very low grant rate. The system, as Richard was explaining, and as I'm going to talk about, is even more unnavigable if you're in detention, especially with asylum seekers. I do a little bit of detention work. Most of my clients aren't detained, but preparing a client who's in detention is really near impossible, and especially when the case has to deal with sexual orientation. In fact, most of the, when you meet with clients, they don't give you a private room. So I'm talking to a client, there's a glass in front of us, and there are other detainees in that room, and the client wants to say something, but they're looking around, and most of my clients will refuse to speak with me in person, and they'll either write it down. But I'll be talking a little bit about credibility and corroboration. It's really very difficult to do any kind of client prep with somebody who's being detained. Unfortunately, as Richard had also mentioned, the U.S. is really committed to funding immigration and customs enforcement. So this whole idea of enforcement, the enforcement wing of immigration, funding it and also detaining people who are undocumented. We have seen a dramatic increase in arrests. Right now, there are about 30,000 persons who are detained across the U.S., about 1,200 who are held in Massachusetts in 3 main prisons. There are only about 8 ICE facilities and I think 7 private federal facilities, and everyone else is held in prisons. So 67% of people who are detained are in prisons. And in the detention standards, there's really no regulation that immigration detainees can't be mixed with criminal detainees. So in some units, you do have a mix. Fortunately, in Massachusetts, we do have separate ICE units, and that actually also came with a lot of advocacy by the community. Whether you're detained or not, the asylum and immigration system is very difficult to maneuver, especially for clients who are trying to do it by themselves, and even for clients who are doing it with an attorney. A typical asylum seeker is somebody who suffered incredibly. They've probably suffered beatings, torture, rape, death of a loved one. They're somebody who somehow managed to escape their country and come here, and all they want to do, as any of us would want to do, is to forget. And then here we have forms and declarations, an attorney who's demanding every single detail because an adjudicator will demand every single detail. So it's actually a very difficult, unlike other areas of immigration practice, you can't just fill out a few forms and throw them away and hope for a paper adjudication. Every asylum applicant is interviewed. And as I tell most of my clients, you don't know who you're going to get. You don't know if you're going to get the nasty judge or the nasty trial attorney who likes to sort of degrade everyone. Or you're going to get the asylum officer who's not that sensitive and is going to ask you, well, prove you're gay. When did you have your first relationship? How many boyfriends do you have? You just don't know. So really we have to prepare clients for every possible form of an interview. For those that have suffered some kind of sexual violence, we do also work with, and again, in Massachusetts, we're very, very lucky. We have a very good system of free care and also an excellent system of medical health professionals that work with the refugee community so we can make those referrals. But all of these things, if you're working with an asylum seeker, or if you know somebody who maybe you think should apply for asylum but they're very reluctant, you kind of can't blame them. It's really easy to lose motivation. It's really easy to feel that you're just overwhelmed by the system. You just can't understand. Most of us attorneys can't understand. It's so incredibly complex, and you can't read the adjudicator's mind. Another problem with asylum is the lack of evidence. You never have the letter by the torturer that says, I tortured so-and-so on this date, in this manner, in this place. And yet the judges, the asylum officers really demand corroborating evidence. Especially difficult in sexual orientation cases where you have an adjudicator saying, prove it to me, and ask all sorts of sensitive questions. And some of them do apologize, but again, it's really difficult to come up with the evidence to prove. Most of the evidence is the client's oral and written testimony. And as you can imagine, those stories don't come out in even 3 or 4 meetings. Now, I'm fortunate. I work for a nonprofit. I can spend 3 or 4 months on a case. I can sit with my clients for 60 hours and wait for them, but that's not always true, especially clients who are paying, although I'm sure Richard's But you know, some don't. They just have 2 or 3 sessions and then try to pull something